Today's story is about one of the oddest musical pairings in rock and roll history. In 1967, a man who would soon become the world's most legendary acid rock guitarist of all time agreed to be the warm-up act for a tour by one of the goofiest but hottest bubblegum teenybopper groups in America. Yes, it's true. Jimi Hendrix once opened for the Monkees. 10 times, in fact. They say that aims and ambitions can create strange bedfellows, and in the more naive days of the first decade of classic rock, it's hard to wrap your mind around such an odd pairing. Although, keep in mind that in that very same year, The Who opened for Herman's Hermits. And as an aside, there is a 2-minute Herman's Hermits hit song called Henry VIII, and it is one of the most annoying earworm monstrosities of all time. If you look it up and you decide to listen to it, don't say I didn't warn you.
Second verse, same as the first.
Anyway, back to our story. So, to properly set this up, let's go back a couple of years earlier.
Wait!
What? What is it?
A brilliant idea.
Well?
That's what we need, a brilliant idea.
The Monkees were artificially assembled in 1965, and by the spring of 1967, the time of this particular tour, they were arguably the biggest act in America. Aspiring filmmaker Bob Rafelson had actually developed the idea for the Monkees a few years earlier, in 1962, but he was never able to sell the series. However, when in 1964 the Beatles' film A Hard Day's Night came out to huge success, it inspired Rafelson to revive his idea for the Monkees. He and his partner Bert Schneider sold the show to Screen Gems Television in 1965. The concept was to make a TV version of A Hard Day's Night, an imaginary band like the Beatles, but who hadn't yet experienced any success. Rafelson and Schneider's original idea was to cast an existing New York group, the Lovin' Spoonful, who were not well known at the time. However, it turned out the band had already signed a record contract which would have denied Screen Gems the right to market the music from the show, so they were out. What the two television producers eventually decided to do was to run an ad in The Hollywood Reporter and Daily Variety, inviting insane boys aged 17 to 21 to audition. Madness! Auditions! Folk and roll musicians, singers for acting roles in new TV series. Running parts for 4 insane boys aged 17 to 21. Want spirited Ben Franks types. Have courage to work. Must come down for an interview. By the way, Ben Franks was a Sunset Boulevard, West Hollywood restaurant and a favorite late-night hangout of rockers like Frank Zappa, the Mamas and the Papas, and the Rolling Stones, due to its proximity to a lot of recording studios. The ad they ran drew over 400 aspiring actors and musicians, all of whom were no doubt dreaming of getting paid handsomely to be in a rock band. Some of the hopefuls it attracted included Paul Williams, who ended up becoming a hugely successful singer, songwriter, and actor in his own right. Stephen Stills, best known for his work with Buffalo Springfield and Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. Legend says he didn't get the gig because his teeth weren't straight enough. Stills did, however, tip off his friend Peter Tork, and Peter was one of the 4 who ultimately got the gig. Danny Hutton auditioned. He's best known as one of the 3 lead singers of Three Dog Night. And Harry Nilsson, who also went on to be a renowned singer-songwriter himself. Nilsson actually had one of his own songs later recorded by the Monkees, Cuddly Toy. It was a hit, and Nielsen earned enough in royalties to quit his job at the bank and begin his own career as a full-time singer-songwriter.
Views are spontaneous and unrehearsed.
After sifting through all this talent and filming many of the auditions, the producers finally settled on the quartet of Mickey Dolenz, Davy Jones, Mike Nesmith, and Peter Tork. Here's a couple of peeks at their auditions.
Shut the door, will you?
Good evening, Ed.
Shut the door. Mike, sit down somewhere. I want to ask you a lot of questions about yourself. Tell us what your name is.
Well, why are you asking me that? It's weird. Get on something else. Great topic. However, I will tell you about the time that I was in the Air Force.
Why do you do this kind of business?
What's that?
Playing the music.
I don't know. That's just where it's at.
What before then?
I was a failure.
Yeah, but did you work at that?
Yeah.
Do you think you're a goof?
Do you?
No.
I think I'm out of work. I hope I get this serious.
Mike, let me ask you something. Do you think you can play another part? A part of another guy?
What is that? What do you want me to be? Strong and silent?
Yeah, be strong and silent. Hey, were you ever a strong and silent girl before?
Have you ever had that?
Let me ask you something now. What are you doing with one sneaker on and one?
I can't make decisions, no, it's the truth. No, see, these guys have boots on, you know, and like, I didn't know, I was told to dress casual, so I came in a plaid shirt and my surfer tennies, you know, and my blue Levi's, and then these guys have Beatles stuff on, you know, with a Levi jacket. So
Elephant boy!
It's funny, he's been asking about you, too.
Hey, Nick. No, seriously, how long has it been since a real steady job?
Actually, we should have this on film.
He's a funny man. Hi. Well, I was a box boy at Forest Lawn.
I got blue boxes.
Realize where they are, and then take it from there. He says he doesn't really do it, that, you know, hang people up or to kind of cut down, you know, and...
Hey, Davey, let me ask you one thing. Did you start off like, are you a Kentucky colonel's son? I mean, what, you know?
No, my father's a fitter.
A
He's
what?
an engineer, an engineer on the railways, you know.
How did you get into show business? How did that all start out?
Oh, I used to act at school and whatnot, and they said I should be an actor, but I wanted to be a jockey.
Hey, Davey, jockeys aren't big guys, are they? How
No,
tall are you anyway?
about 5'3",
The
yeah.
girls like that size or what?
Well, you know, I kind of like tall girls, yeah. It's kind of groovy.
You look like such a clean kid.
I am a clean, you know, they may put my hair over my ears and all this shit. I'm really a clean-cut kid, you know.
Take off the hat. We don't want to see what the hair looks like.
Doesn't it
What,
look great?
Hey, Davey, let me ask you, what bag are you in?
What?
What bag are you in?
Bag? I
Yeah.
don't get that.
Cartwheel, something. Do something, quick.
A song and... You must be joking.
No, I'm not.
What do you
Go
want?
ahead.
What do you want me to do? Sing?
Dance one of your little quick things. Hey, Davey, you want to know something? Honestly, hold it for a second.
What?
I really think you should have been a jockey.
Abkdef Gish Kulnap Krista Wikshes.
What was that?
It's the alphabet. Abkdef Gish Kulnap Krista Wikshes.
What's the most bread you ever made in your life?
I once got scale.
Truly, why? Why do you want to be a monkey?
Well, it's my natural inheritance.
Being a TV star? Has that ever occurred to you, man? Like, we fished you out of nowhere.
That's true.
What a bit.
I'm eternally grateful, too. I'll do anything.
Hey, Peter,
Do they realize that since history, our founding fathers wore their hair long, Columbus wore his hair long, and loved to run their fingers through my soft, silky hair?
The surf's starting to rise. Want to go?
Maybe later.
Whatever you say. What's bugging you?
$150. We could have used that job.
Job's a job. There'll be others. Now, what's really bugging you?
Well, she's a groovy kid, you know.
Sure you want to help her. I want to help SJ, but I can't. He's feeble-minded.
Knock it off. Wendell's right. We should help Vanessa.
Hey, surf's starting to rise. Want to go?
Maybe later.
Hey, come on, man. Let's go to the beach.
No, man, I don't want to go.
What's bugging you?
$150, man. We could have used that job.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Sure you want to help her. I want to help SJ, too, but I can't. He's feeble-minded.
Hey, knock it off. What's bugging you?
$150. We could have used that job.
Sure you want to help her. I want to help SJ, too, but I can't. He's feeble-minded.
Come on, knock it off, fellas.
And then it seemed like overnight, and it really was the textbook description of overnight success. They went from lip-syncing boy band comedians to genuine international pop stars. Mickey once said it was the equivalent of Leonard Nimoy really becoming a Vulcan. With a stable of super talented songwriters lined up to write for them, including Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart, Neil Diamond, David Gates, Andy Kim, Neil Sedaka, and Carole King and Jerry Goffin. Combined with the talents of many amazing studio musicians, including members of the Wrecking Crew, the Monkees' TV show, their music, and their careers all took off like a rocket. When asked about the sudden rush of fame, Mickey Dolenz, who had experienced fame as a child, starring in Circus Boy, said, "We were initially rather isolated and secluded from it all. Our workload was enormous. We were rehearsing the TV show 10 hours a day, and then rehearsing for touring, and then recording at night. And that went on for a couple of years." It was when they went out on tour that they really caught on to what was going on. Mickey again. "Nothing could have prepared us for the event that we were presented with. Usually when you start in a new band, you play bar mitzvahs or bowling alley parking lots. I've done that in cover bands, playing cocktail lounges and stuff. But our first Monkee gig was at a 10,000-seat, sold-out arena. It was very exciting and quite daunting. On the other hand, you couldn't really hear anything anyway." The Monkees would go on to sell more than 75 million records, making them one of the top-selling bands of all time. And they also had a very cool car, a Monkee-mobile, a 1966 candy apple red Pontiac GTO convertible with some so-60s modifications that included a rear-mounted parachute. So there. Critics of the Monkees said they were simply the Prefab Four, a made-for-TV knockoff of the Beatles. However, the Beatles themselves took it in stride and even hosted a party for the Monkees when they visited England. George Harrison praised their self-produced musical attempts, saying, "It's obvious what's happening. There's talent there. They're doing a TV show. It's a difficult chore, and I wouldn't be in their shoes for the world." Mike Nesmith once asked Lennon, "Do you think we're a cheap imitation of the Beatles, your movies and your records?" To which Lennon assuredly replied, "I think you're the greatest comic talent since the Marx Brothers. I've never missed one of your programs." But regardless of what the Beatles thought of them, a good summation of the negative backlash the band was getting can be seen in this article by dance band trombonist Jack Bentley, who denounced the Monkees as talentless frauds who mimed to music played by others. An outraged Bentley wrote, "This idiotic monkey business, was ever a bigger spoof pulled on the pop world? The group's musical fame is the result of a gigantic Hollywood TV publicity campaign. The Americans never forgave the Beatles for not being born there, so they decided to create their own. Even the Monkees television show is a prolonged imitation of the Beatles films. The fact that the big spoof came off, making the Monkees #1 on both sides of the Atlantic, is a downright disgrace, an insult to pop fans, a threat to the pop business as a whole, and a deterrent to any youngster who has a musical future in mind. There's a little bit more. Musicians like myself spent years of hard practice before being able to earn a living then comparable to a grocery assistant's. Even the lowliest pop group in Britain can't get a job without some hard work. Yet here are a bunch of kids trading on other people's talents and cashing in on millions. Who can ever regard that #1 spot with any seriousness again? Musically, comparing the Monkees with the Beatles is like comparing a milk float with a Mercedes, whatever that means. But this critical reputation has softened somewhat over the years, with the recognition that the Monkees were neither the first manufactured group nor unusual in this respect. Yes, the Wrecking Crew musicians provided most of the musicianship, but as we now know, there were a lot of artists using studio talent. Bands like the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the Mamas and the Papas, and the Byrds, it goes on. In fact, the Wrecking Crew played on several hundred top 40 hits. And also, the Monkees did begin contributing their own songs, and their musicianship improved over time. They ultimately became a self-directed group, playing their own instruments and writing many of their own songs. And it's been said that the Monkees pioneered the music video format and paved the way for every boy band that has followed in their wake. Monkey money also enabled the producers to finance movies like Easy Rider and 5 Easy Pieces, which made Jack Nicholson a star. Perhaps it wasn't so much righteous indignation, but rather thinly disguised jealousy that motivated the scornful dismissal of what must, in retrospect, be seen as an entertaining, imaginative, and highly memorable exercise in pop culture.
This is H.L. Nesmith. He owns a small spread in southern Texas. What's the name of the ranch again, Mr. Nesmith?
Houston.
Ah, kid, well, tell me a little about your background.
That's it. That's perfect. That little wave of hair, and the little green hat sitting casually cocked on his head.
And let it be known that in 2014, the Monkees were inducted into America's Pop Music Hall of Fame. So, back to the spring of 1967, we're at Monkey Mania's peak. Mickey Dolenz was the first Monkee to discover Hendrix. While visiting New York, a friend advised him to check out this amazing musician in the village who played guitar with his teeth. Dolenz was impressed, but didn't remember the guitarist's name until he saw the Jimi Hendrix Experience on stage at the Monterey Pop Festival several months later. Mickey and Peter were sitting in the audience in Monterey, and as Mickey explains, out walks these 3 incredibly decorated characters. And I just remember going, hey, that's the guy who plays guitar with his teeth. Afterwards, I told our producers, you got to check this guy out.
I suggested to the producers of our show that would be a really cool opening act because they're very theatrical. And the Monkees was this theatrical act. And I guess they liked the idea. Our producers liked the idea. So sure enough, a few months later.
And we got a phone call from Mike Jeffrey in New York to tell us he pulled off this fantastic deal, that he got them on the Monkees tour. And Jimmy and I just sat there stunned. We couldn't believe he'd done this. I mean, the Monkees.
So I thought it was great because the Monkees were huge in America at that point. They had their own aeroplane with Monkees written on the side, so I thought that was lovely. And we got little things saying Monkees touring party and all that rubbish. But we didn't actually go down that well because it was a whole different crowd altogether.
Peter Tork and Michael Nesmith supported the choice, as both were anxious to be accepted as serious musicians and believed that Hendrix would lend them some credibility with rock critics and older record buyers. Besides, Tork would say later, it would give us a chance to watch Jimi Hendrix perform night after night. Mike Nesmith had first heard Hendrix himself playing Hey Joe while listening to a cassette club recording at a dinner party with John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Eric Clapton. Why don't I ever get invited to those parties? Nesmith recalls, "Everyone at the table was silent. When the song was over, someone said, 'How could anybody be that good?' When I got back to the hotel room after dinner, I ran into Mickey. He told me that he had seen Hendrix and he had asked him if he wanted to be the opening act for the next leg of our tour, and Jimmy had agreed." Nesmith's immediate feelings were clashed. He said, "I was thrilled and confused." Although Nesmith thought the combination of the Monkees and the Experience, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, was staggeringly weird, he couldn't help but let the thrill of seeing this new electric musician in person every night stop him from sensibly challenging the logic of joining up these two different acts. Hendrix had already had 3 hits in England, but he was a virtual unknown in America. His manager wanted to capitalize on the buzz generated by Jimmy's recent Monterey pop performance, and the Monkees were just about the biggest act in the country at the time. The Monkees wanted respect, and Hendrix wanted publicity. So, with the goal of attaining a mainstream hit in the United States, Jimi Hendrix and the Experience agreed to join the Monkees tour. What could possibly go wrong? As I've said, the Monkees' 1967 summer tour occurred at the height of Monkey Mania. They were going to be visiting 18 different cities in the United States and in England throughout July and August. Just 5 days before they began the tour, the Monkees' TV series had taken home 2 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Comedy Series. And throughout the tour, the Monkees' third album, Headquarters, was at number 2 on the charts behind the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So Hendrix joined the tour in Jacksonville, Florida in July 1967. Listen to this radio promo announcing Jimmy's appearance with the Monkees and describing him to listeners not yet familiar with his music.
New group with the Monkees is called the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and they've joined the Monkees concert tour of the U.S. On July the 29th, the Jimi Hendrix Experience will be with the Monkees. Jimmy's 22 years old and was discovered in Greenwich Village, New York, and invited by the manager of the Animals to audition for a new group being formed in England, and it happened, and the Jimi Hendrix Experience is the name of the group, and they've had a couple of top 10 hits in England. Hey Joe is one of them, and the Purple Haze is the other, and this is their first appearance in America. So a new group, Jimi Hendrix Experience, traveling with the Monkees.
The musicians from both bands struck up a friendship that Nesmith has said thankfully outlived the tour. Tales from the Monkees tour reveal that everyone got along great. It's great that the two bands got along, because Monkees audience members had a slightly different reaction to Mr. Hendrix. The Monkees were playing to 12,000 14-year-old girls, so when Hendrix walked on stage, it was an absolute anomaly. Mickey Dolenz said, "The parents were probably not too crazy to begin with about having to sit through a Monkees concert, much less this guy in a psychedelic day-glow blouse playing music from hell, holding his guitar erotically and then lighting it on fire. Jimmy would amble out onto the stage and then break into Foxy Lady, we want Davy, we want the Monkees, Mickey, Police coming, Mickey, my God." It was very embarrassing.
Mickey got him. We went to Monterey and saw Jimmy do what he did, and Mickey got it. I didn't get it. And Mickey said, "We got to get this guy," because Mickey was just enthusiastic about his music. Mickey saw the genius and went for it. And we got the guy. I said, "We got to get this guy. We got to get this guy." So we worked and got him, and that was all there was to it. Nobody thought, here is the avatar, the screaming, scary, the balls off of your daddy music, compared with the Monkees, and it wasn't going to play. No, it didn't cross anybody's mind that it wasn't going to fly. And so there's poor Jimmy. And the kids' hair is standing on end, and they go, we want the Monkees, we want the Monkees. So I heard that Jimmy flipped him off, but I don't know for a fact that he flipped him off and said, I'm not doing this anymore. But I don't know, being thrown off the Monkees tour is probably one of the better things that ever happened to Jimi Hendrix's career. Given the nature of what people were saying about the Monkees at the time, it probably, you know, did give him an extra boost. But it didn't matter. The wonderful thing about that, two wonderful things. One was that we went early to the shows and listened, you know, just to listen to what this man could do, because he really was, he was a world-class musician no matter what. And the other thing was that he was such a sweet guy that it was really just a pleasure to have him around for company. Just, how you doing? Just that his air of just, everything's all right. Things are cool.
It was just bizarre. He was hired because Mickey, I think, discovered him and wanted him on the tour, and there was some deal cut, and that was it. We needed an opening act, and he was a blues player. I don't think anybody knew exactly what was happening until he got up on stage the first time. The first time I ever heard him play, I was blown away. I mean, it was, you know, standing in the presence of something extraordinary. The guy was a master. But opening for the Monkees was just weird because it wasn't his crowd at all, and the promoters would come back furious. Get that guy off the stage. And the mothers and the local priests, and so, I mean, they were just going crazy because they had brought their family to this kind of, you know, little television show, concert slash goof around, and suddenly here's Jimi Hendrix in the height of his power, because he was really just coming up as a player.
Every time Hendrix would go on in front of us, the crowd would be out there, every lick he would go, Foxy, and the crowd would go, Davy! And he'd go, Foxy! And they'd go, Davy! And he walked off the stage.
Well, you know, that wasn't my fault, was it?
This was the final straw for Hendrix. He had joined the tour on its first date in Jacksonville, Florida on July 8th, and he stuck it out for 9 more shows, exiting after a run of 3 concerts at the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium in New York City in mid-July. Jimmy walked off the Monkee stage for the final time, and he gave the finger to his audience as he left. They had been scheduled to play 29 tour dates. Of his exit after a mere 10 days of Monkey Mania, Hendrix has said it was just the wrong audience, joking that he was being replaced by Mickey Mouse. And just an aside on Jimmy, he'd already had some pretty strange employment experiences. 2 of them come to mind. A few years before meeting the Monkees, Jimmy had been hired by Little Richard as a sideman, but his flamboyance was evident even then, and that appears to have caused clashes with Little Richard.
And the star of the show, of course, was Little Richard.
Great.
You know? And one of the nights, I hear this incredible argument going on. Don't you ever play guitar with your teeth again? You're just the guitar player. I'm the king of rock and roll. Don't you ever, motherfucker... Argument going on. He was talking to Jimi Hendrix, his guitar player.
Oh, how funny.
Don't upstage me.
And then Ike Turner of Ike and Tina Turner hired him, and shortly thereafter fired him.
He had all these pedals, man, on a board, man, with the fuzz, the wow, the distortion, and all this shit, man. And I would give him a, hey, man, you take the solo. By the time he gets through going down all these damn pedals, man, the solo is over, man. And so I told him about that 4 or 5 times, man, and he kept on doing it, so I cut him loose.
And speaking of odd facts, I'd like to throw in 2 odd monkey-related facts here. Did you know that Michael Nesmith's mother invented liquid paper in her kitchen in 1951, originally calling the stuff Mistake Out? Her correction fluid would go on to be a godsend for millions of typists and bring millions of dollars to herself and then later to her only child, Michael Nesmith. She sold the Liquid Paper Corporation to Gillette in 1979 for almost $50 million, plus a royalty on every bottle sold until the year 2000. When Bet Nesmith Graham died a few months later in 1980, She left half her fortune to Michael and the other half to philanthropic organizations. And did you know that David Bowie's real name was David Robert Jones? He went by Davy Jones in his early formative rock and roll days. He only changed his name to Bowie to avoid confusion with the skyrocketing star, Monkey Davy Jones. He picked Bowie based on frontiersman Jim Bowie and his famous knife. So wrapping this all up, as I said, the exposure to being on tour with the hottest act in America did help propel Hendrix to the next level, and his music began to be recognized in the United States. Purple Haze debuted on the Billboard Hot 100 in August, and as a result, superstardom came quickly for Hendrix. So monkeying around for those few weeks may not have been that bad of an idea after all. And finally, whatever you thought of the Monkees way back then, their cutting-edge TV show, their top-notch Wrecking Crew music, their individual personalities, their desire to be in charge of their own destinies, whatever you think of the Monkees now, when we're all a little older and a little wiser, and we're able to look back on the 60s with a little more understanding eye, I'm sure you will agree the Monkees had one of the most extraordinary careers of any band in rock and roll.
Here we come, walking down the street. We get the funniest looks from everyone we meet.